Obviously from the testicles, the testosterone starts to move in and change the whole body from a boy into a man. It's got to be done before the boy gets too old. Of course, they didn't do it to just any boy. The boys had to be already singing very well.
So castration didn't make you a good singer?
Oh, no. All it did was to preserve that high pitch.
Did it hurt?
I think it did. There were various ways that they did it. One of the ways was to put the boy in very, very hot water. This was full of various herbs and spices, and they would be given alcohol and drugged. They would then manipulate the testicles until they wore down. It sounds awful, but the kid
What do you mean wore down?
Well, they wore down. They broke down their structure, and because they were only young, it just destroyed the function. And then, of course, once they've done that, they can cut the spermatic cord. There are clippers and all sorts of things that they used to use. It was just awful.
18th century observers didn't care about the downsides of being a castrato. They raved about them having the voices of angels.
The variety of it was incredible, and a lot of the most important music, which we associate now perhaps with female voices, was actually written not for female voices at all, but for castrati. The big period for it was between 1650 and 1750. But it went on and on and on. And I bet you don't realise when the last one died, 1922. Yeah, 1922. Alessandro Moreschi. And he was the last castrato of the Sistine Chapel.
It's not a very good recording. Moreschi was past it and was never of the first rank anyway, but it does give you an idea of the unearthly quality of the castrato.
Back in the 18th century, they would shout out, "Evviva il coltello!" Long live the knife! They would, because they just couldn't believe how wonderful these singers were.
But only the top castrati had fame and fortune. Out of 4,000 boys castrated every year, perhaps 1% made it. 99% were sad failures. Worse still, they looked like freaks. Castrati tended to be abnormally tall, obese, and with no body hair.
Some of them, of course, were absolutely wonderful singers. Others were a bit ordinary, and others were total failures. And some died. A really bad deal. You couldn't have a normal, ordinary family life, of course. You run the risk of disease, premature disease. You could be very badly deformed. You had all sorts of difficulties of that sort, but musically, if you were of the top draw, you were laughing. When you were a choir boy, if you were a good soloist and showed aptitude, yes, you might very well have been one of those boys back in the 18th century, as I might have been. But luckily, we didn't live in that period, and we didn't live in Italy.
What an intense relief.
Like as the heart desireth the water brooks, so longeth my soul after thee, O God.
And I've still got my testicles. Britain really did rule the waves in Georgian times, thanks to Nelson's victory at Trafalgar. As we continued to fight France and Spain, the contemporary song Rule Britannia summed up Britain's determination never to be slaves. Others weren't so lucky. This was also the time of the slave trade. Thousands of captured Africans were shipped in horrifying conditions across the Atlantic via ports like Liverpool and Bristol to work in the American plantations. We can't do justice to their lives. Worse jobs implies at least some element of freedom, and of course they had none. But we can see where some of them ended up, because when the British finally came to their senses and abolished slavery, the British Navy was sent into the Atlantic to try to intercept some of the French and Spanish slave ships. Some of the liberated slaves ended up enlisting in the ships that had saved them. Once aboard, they joined sailors from many different races and also a number of women. Most of them can't have known what they were letting themselves in for. Although nothing was as bad as slavery, Britannia's rule of the waves was maintained by a whole host of terrible jobs in ships like this. Life was so tough that British recruits had to be dragged on board by the press gang, and captains were frequently offered prisoners, debtors and patients. Richard, if I was a raw recruit fresh on your ship, what kind of tasks would you give me to do?
Well, the press gang isn't giving me the seaman I want anymore, and the quota acts are pulling in every vagrant and ne'er-do-well from all corners of the kingdom, and you look like a landsman to me.
Oh yeah, I'm a landsman.
I think you'd probably be a waster.
I'm not, I work really hard.
I know you do, yes, but wasters are the people with no nautical skills, and we give the really dull, thick duties in the middle of the ship under supervision.
Oh yeah.
So what did you do when you were ashore?
I'm an actor and a writer and a television
So you can read and
presenter.
write?
Oh yeah.
Well, I think we could turn you into a surgeon's assistant and start you off as a lob-lolly boy.
Where do I go for that?
Down below.
The Historical Maritime Society has developed a unique way of demonstrating the primitive nature of surgery at sea using fake blood and pork belly. For the lob lolly boy, having to witness these barbaric operations must have been one of the worst parts of the job. Carl's a lob lolly boy, isn't he? What's he doing?
He is. Effectively, he's a manual assistant to the surgeon. His main task is, as you can see him now, is to hold the patient steady while I'm trying to remove this musket ball from him.
And what do you want me to do?
If you can, I'd like you to hold his legs. I think the pain may bite in fairly shortly.
What's this op?
I'm trying to locate a musket ball. The patient's been hit from the front and the ball has travelled through. I can feel it, I just can't get hold of the ball. Now, I'm trying my best to get the ball out with my fingers.
Yeah.
I can feel it just below the line here, but I'm trying desperately to avoid the spine.
Why is a lob lolly boy called a lob lolly?
It's an allusion to the colloquial name or slang name for what we call portable soup. It's derived from that.
It's not soup.
No, it's a lozenge. It's a rendered lozenge of animal matter mixed with vegetal matter.
It smells like a rancid OXO cube.
Absolutely, and it keeps for years.
So basically what you're doing is feeding the sick consomme.
Exactly. Yeah.
How are you getting on?
Yeah, it's a struggle. It's coming.
Yeah.
Hold him.
He's really twitching now. Hang on, Carl. Whoa! Hey, there we've got him. Hang on, he's rolling around on the floor. Blimey, I thought it was a tiny little bullet. No wonder you were having problems getting it out. Oh, that must have hurt. Mind you, presumably, there wasn't any way of deadening the pain, no anaesthetic or anything.
None at all. We like to keep the patients awake because we have no way of monitoring them if they fall into coma or whatsoever.
So how did they cope with the pain?
They quite literally, the term is bite the bullet, but we don't give them bullets, they bite on a piece of leather. And it just gives them their mouth something else to do other than scream.
I don't know if he's laughing, but he's definitely shaking down here. I think you've cured him. You're right. He's got a case of very bad acting.
Could you make yourself useful?
Bit of a problem, aren't you? The lob lolly boy also got the job of rounding up the amputated limbs and tossing them overboard. But although his job must have been bloody and depressing, at least he avoided some of the other horrors of life on deck.
What are you going to do now?
I don't know, you tell me.
I think it's about time we turned you into a topman.
What's that?
Topman's a very important member of the ship's crew. All the manoeuvring on the ship requires handling the ropes, heaving the braces, trimming the sheets, and a lot of it's done aloft.
Aloft means up there.
Aloft